Okay, hi everyone, this is SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and I'm back with another video analysis. I apologize, I meant to do a follow-up to the Benko Gambit, my last video. Unfortunately though, I've had some problems and I've lost most of the analysis because of some fun computer issues. So I still will do the follow-up, exploring the endgame of the Benko Gambit, the last game that I played, but it's going to take a little bit, so we'll just move on. And this is the most recent game that I finished. This is me versus Volaman. I was rated just over 2,000. He was rated just under 2,000 at the time. And this game really comes down to a couple of critical moments. Most of the moves, in fact, don't really matter, but there's a critical moments where, honestly, I made a series of bad mistakes. And I won the game in the end, well, as they say, is I didn't make the last mistake. That was my opponent. But anyway, let's take a look, and maybe we can learn from this game and from the moments in particular. So I was white, and we had an open Sicilian, and yeah, I actually played the open, not one of my anti-Sicilians, but then I played this, the Prince variation, which is sort of a specialty of mine, where the idea is no matter what black does, okay, unless he plays d5 here, which is probably critical, and then white will usually play bishop g4. There's some tension here, and it's a pretty interesting position. At the same time, if you don't know what you're doing as black, you can get in trouble. If you don't know what you're doing as white, you can get in trouble. Most people don't go for this line, and we won't explore that. We'll look at what happened in the game. Replay bishop b7, and then the main idea, c4. And this is probably by far my favorite pawn structure to have as white. Look at this. We have firm control over d5, d6. Let's turn it red. There we go. Is chronically weak. If we can get a knight to d5, we're just absolutely laughing. So that's it. And the counter to this is that white has this obvious strategy. It's less clear what black should do. I mean, sure, if he could get d5 in, that'd be absolutely fantastic, but it's extremely hard if it's even possible, and most of the time, it isn't. Similarly, his other pawn break, b5, very, very difficult to get in, and normally, if white knows what he's doing, if white just plays normal moves, basically. And so black has a much harder time generating counterplay. We'll see this in the game, actually. And so he castle, simple development. I like starting with bishop e3, just that way he can't do anything annoying with not that. How about this? Queen b6. Because if I allow that, then the queen is stopping me from castling, so I just play bishop e3 early. But again, this is really simple. Here we just develop. He develops, I develop, he develops, I develop. And now here he plays a move I'm not very happy with. He plays queen c7, because that just... This is a normal square for the queen, but this is not a normal Sicilian. Because after rook c1, we can see that the rook is eyeing the queen. He plays a6, and I'm able to jump in right away with knight d5. And he can't take this knight. If he were to take it, take. Well, okay, there's a fork there, so that doesn't work. And if you're to take with the bishop, say, it still doesn't work because the queen is pinned. Or the knight is pinned to the queen. And so he's forced, he plays in the game queen b8. And we can see here that white has a very comfortable position. Again, everything is going perfect, really. I control the d5 square. I've got knight to d5. I'm ready to castle. And I've got all sorts of pressure in the center and the queen side. Conversely, if you were to ask what should black do, it's not clear. I would imagine black would want to do something eventually, either with, not that, knight c7 to c5, something like this, or moving something like the knight over here, say, and by moving the knight, he'd be able to get this f5 pawn in. And really, that's the only way black can really generate play. Again, it's not the easiest, and the more the center opens up, the weaker everything could be. I mean, if there's an exchange on f5, you know, take, then all of a sudden I have the e4 square as well. And, you know, again, black has to be really careful, whereas white has relatively easy play. So far, so good. So in the game, let's just delete these arrows. Nope, not that. There. How about like this? Aha! There we go. So instead of playing h3, I castled. He moved his bishop back, which is fine. Queen d2, a5. And this is the first semi-critical moment of the game, in which I have to ask myself, do I let him play a4 or not? In the game, I chose to play a4. I chose to stop that. But this has some obvious drawbacks. For one, this pawn could be weak. It's not easy for me to defend it. If the pawn were attacked, say, bishop d7 to bishop a4, the only way to defend it right now, we move the rook back over there, which clearly isn't ideal. So I gotta watch that pawn. And then, of course, even more obviously, is now there's a beautiful square here on b4 for the knight to jump in. So imagine this knight goes here, and then this knight goes here. We can see the dark squares they could be bad for me. Here, especially if I were forced to trade my bishop, or even if I didn't trade my bishop, there's two knights here, I can only trade for one of them. And so black is going to get some play. It's not clear what those knights can do, right? He's not really threatening anything right away, but they'd be stopping me from doing anything on the queen side. So I think a4 was an inaccuracy, and a better move. I could have done anything. Let's even just say, I bring my rook into the game. And if you were to push in, yeah, my knight looks silly here on a1, but in just two moves, I can go here and then into b4, which isn't bad at all. Or I could go here into b5, and I would have twin octopi over here on the queen side. So this is a possibility, and this pawn now, before that was my pawn, back up, like in the game where I end up playing a4. That's my pawn that's weak, potentially. Whereas if I let him push, now that's his pawn that he has to always watch and be careful for. And, I could, there's a lot of arrows here, but you can see how there's things that could attack it relatively quickly. And so, I would have liked that. As it were, though, a4 really isn't that bad of a deal. It's this next move, where he plays knight e7, which is kind of a funky move, eh? And if we just back up, we can see what he did in the last three moves here, is that he brought his bishop back, so that way he can now move his knight here. And of course, what we need to do is we always need to ask ourselves, what is my opponent's idea? What is his threat? And there's two ideas that he has here. One is, it looks like he moved the knight so he could think about perhaps taking on d5 now. That's one idea. And the second idea is, again, my weak a4 pawn, where he's ready to attack it with his bishop, and then it's not easy to see how I defend it. And again, there's also, he could move the knight here to here, and then we have two pieces attacking the a4 pawn, and well, I might just lose that. So I've got to be careful. So there's my opponent's idea. And this is probably it's the biggest mistake in the game for me here. It's where, okay, I now know what my opponent's idea is, but then there's something else you have to do. You need to ask yourself, is it a good idea? Does it work? Should I be scared about that? Do I really care if he's trying to attack one of these, a pawn on this side of the board? What are my ideas? Is there anything that I can do? And there's actually something pretty obvious in this position, is that, well, by moving his knight back, now his bishop no longer covers his knight, and there's a pretty obvious sequence here, take, which ruins his pawn structure. And then look at this, f4. And we can see that this position is actually changing quite drastically. If black does nothing, like, I don't know, maybe he brings it back or something, and he lets f5 come in, he's probably simply lost. Okay, bishop moves somewhere. None of his pieces can come to the king side. So we can just imagine the bishop comes over, the rook slides over, the bishop comes in, maybe not like that, but the queen comes, and everything is aimed at the king. And It'd be extremely difficult for him to stop that, if it even is possible. I imagine he's simply lost here. There's not even anything to look. He has no counterplay. He has nothing to attack, and I'm coming right at him. Also possible is if you were to take on f4. So obviously he can't allow me to play f5. What if you were to take? Whoops. Okay, take. And now we can see it. A related problem is the position is opening up. There's now huge pressure here on d6, and similarly, my pieces can still fly in to the queen side, or sorry, the king side, which is still wide open. And in addition, the center is open. Even maybe, you know, this knight can come in. Holy cow. Lots of green arrows again. Lots of pressure. So, I wasn't worried about him taking. I wasn't worried about him letting me play f5. I was wondering what would happen if he played f5 himself. And I looked at this, and to me it seemed unclear. And so, I simply discarded it. I stopped calculating right here, which is a really silly thing to do, because if this works, I simply win, because I'll have a huge attack on the king side. You need to look at this. I'm not even sacrificing material. I'm simply opening the position up. And two things to notice, well, it's really the same thing, is look at his pieces. In particular, his queen is over here on the queen side. And it's stuck there. It's going to take it a long time to come over here. Similar, this bishop, right? It's not easy for it to come over. This knight would have to move, then maybe it can come to f6 and g7, maybe, right? And of course, this rook is way over. And so black is defending, you know, without a queen, without a rook, and, you know, only half a bishop. Whereas, again, I can come over very, very quickly to the king side. And so there's enough here. Like, when you look at this position, there's enough to make you, there are enough clues here that this likely does work, that I should have looked at this a lot harder than I did. And this is on me. If we back up, and this position is, perhaps it was stylistic, perhaps it was laziness. I chose, you know, not to look at that, and I played queen c2. Which is an absolutely nothing move, which does very, very, very little, and it throws my advantage clean away. Because I had an advantage up until now, possibly even a winning attack. We can look at variations later. And instead I played queen c2. Now, I played it for a very good reason. It was so that way if you were, well, a good reason. For a reason, like it wasn't just a random move, is that if you were to play bishop d7, I was going to play knight to d2. Because now, whoops, my queen is defending the pawn, which is great. I could play b3 to defend it even further if I had to. And I'm also thinking about potentially moving this pawn. So either he'll take on d5, or I'll push this pawn, and now this knight, which was doing nothing on b3, could jump to the c4 square, which is absolutely awesome. Okay, that's good. I mean, it makes some sense, but is this exciting? Is this as clear as an attack on the king? Not even close. Right? Do I even have an advantage in anything like this? Everything I'm talking about is just me. I'm completely ignoring what my opponent might be trying to do. And so this is a this is clearly a me problem when I'm looking at this position. Sorry, we'll back up. Where I played queen c2 instead. And part of it is that, again, I didn't want to, if I was worried that the attack did not work out, that I would have lost my advantage. And most of the time when I play these types of positions, I don't attack the king. I try and go for the center, you know, I try and attack these pawns, you know, weaknesses over here. Which is fine, but every position is different. And if you have the chance, oops, sorry, you know, to get a position like this where things are opening up, you do it. Like, you just do it. And I didn't. And that's on me. So, and we can see how the game actually changes so much. Because after queen c2, okay, he now takes on d5, he comes back to d7, attacking the pawn. And here, I continued with my plan more or less. I played knight d2. And now I'm kind of doing the opposite of what happened before. Before, if we went back here, my opponent played knight e7, and every move has an idea behind it. What's my opponent's idea? And I figured it was bishop d7, take a4. My mistake was that I was focusing too much on his idea and not enough on mine. What should I be doing? In this case, it should be attacking the king. Open it up. Let's have a go. If we move here, after bishop d7, I started thinking about what is my idea, and I completely ignored what my opponent could be doing. I played knight d2, and then he was primed to play b5. And we'll just look at a couple moves here. So take, he brings the bishop out, attacking my bishop, pinning my bishop, which is undefended. I defend the knight, and then we have a couple of takes. Take, 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 take. And we reached this position. And notice how he's got open files here to my pawn. His rook can slide over, maybe not to the c file right away, but certainly to the b file, pressuring my weak pawn. Is his a pawn weak? Maybe. Is my pawn weak? Probably. And it's open. If we were to back up, what I love about this structure so much, right here, is that black stays constricted, right? It's really hard for him to find moves and, to do anything. And after he played b5, we can see how the lines are opened up, he's exchanged pieces, and things are good. And so then the question should be, we now know what black wants to do. He wants to play b5. And that'll really get his queen in the game, because right now, his queen can't even move anywhere, right? His queen is completely passive. And so some questions should be, is there a way we can stop b5? And of course there is. I could have, okay. So, sorry. Here, is there a way to stop b5? And there is. I could play perhaps queen c4 or bishop b5. And we could look at, say, take, take, maybe he plays this, I move my knight. The position would be similar to the game. I mean, very similar, but the key difference is that we still have these pawns here. And look how his queen does absolutely nothing. His queen still can't move anywhere. He also still has this bishop, which is his bad bishop. Again, his pawns are on dark squares, and this bishop doesn't do very much, and it can barely move. Maybe it can come here. I can go knight c4. All of a sudden, this pawn is weak. And just look at the difference in this position. This pawn is weak. Right? For white, it's pretty much the same, but black still has that clamp, that constriction, that real inability to move. His pieces aren't really happy. Whereas when he got b5 in, all of a sudden he was able to trade off pretty much all of his bad pieces, and he's only left with good pieces. Where if I would have played bishop b5, he isn't able to do that. And so those are my two main errors in this game. So we'll just look at this again. So we're back here. Now the position is still equal-ish, and I thought I was doing okay because after knight f5, my knight is quite nice. Again, the d6 pawn, its potential weakness. And then after check, which is a good move, forces my king over. He's attacking my pawn. I bring my queen in. And then there's a little series of moves. He defends d6. I defend b2. He pushes my knight away. Take, take, ha. So we reached here. And I had calculated this, what was that, 5 moves back or so. And I thought I was doing okay. The thing is, though, is that there's a problem. Is that, yes, right now this knight is better than this knight. But what can this knight actually do? Where can it go? It has no moves. What can it attack? It can't really attack anything. I mean, this is the weakness. The only thing I really can attack in the position, and I can't attack with the knight. And worse, if the knight is here, I can't bring my rook to this square. And worse, if I want to double my rooks, the only file that makes sense is the c file, but now it's staring at my knight. And we can see that there's this lack of coordination in my position. Whereas with black, he plays a4, and we can see that this is brilliant. He's restricting this pawn, so my pawn can't move. He could double on the b file. Okay, so maybe something like this, right? So his rooks are doubling against this pawn, and this pawn is weak. That's good. Maybe this would be... never mind. So anyway, that's what he wants. He can double in this pawn. But there's also something else, is that he can play f5. Sorry. So I played rook a1 to look at the pawn. Is that at any point he could play f5. Now, I don't really want to take, because that would leave this pawn quite weak. But if let's say I do something. If he takes, look what's happened now. Is that, okay, his pawn is weak, sure, maybe. But this pawn is certainly weak, and this pawn is weak. And he's able to attack it. Look, so he's already attacking here. He can bring this guy in here. He can move, this rook around somewhere. So he's either, going to double on the b file, or maybe come to the f file or do something. He can't come to the b file right now because of this, but we can see that black's going to have this pressure. Whereas it's very hard for white to pressure anything. Maybe I can pressure this pawn? Maybe. But it's not easy. Black has the long-term prospects in this position. I'm not saying it's winning. The computer says black has a, half a pawn advantage, right? It's the normal advantage. But he's the one playing, for a win. He's the one that has practical chances here. And I could have suffered a lot if my opponent didn't start going wrong here. So we'll back up. Let's look what happened in the game. So I just played rook a1. And because my opponent has played fairly well, the opening surprised him, kind of muddled through the middle game. He was able to break 3. And it's only here, move 30, that he starts going wrong. And what I think happened here, it's fairly common, is my opponent saw a tactic, and so he went for it, without, looking at any other possibilities. So in the game, he played a3. Let's see, I put it on the board. There we go. With the idea of take, and then if I were to take back, he would of course go down here. That's checkmate. Hoo-ha! Not very good. So I of course don't take. I simply move my rook away. He brings his rook down, and all of a sudden the position has changed. I don't have a weakness anymore. He has no pressure on the queen side. His rooks aren't doing anything. Right now they're staring at this f-pawn, which does nothing. And all of a sudden I'm fine. The position is equal again. So black lost his advantage. In one move, he trades a pair of pawns, and that's it. No problem. So now we enter an endgame. And what's interesting is that this endgame remains very, very equal, and yet I was able to outplay my opponent, and really my opponent outplays himself. Or, well, let's take a look. Good. I play, okay, I bring my king in, he brings his king in, I bring my king in, he moves his knight. And here's where I make the first decision, which starts giving my opponent trouble. Now again, we've talked about this, is that right now my rooks are doubled on the c file, but they're staring at my knight. That's not very good. My rooks want to be staring at, the enemy, and my knight isn't attacking anything. So I would like to move my knight somewhere. And I start by playing knight d8. And this puts some annoying pressure on my opponent. He wants to move his king somewhere and probably play f5, like we discussed. However, if he starts moving his king, then the pawn hangs. And there's also this threat of maybe playing rook c7. Well, maybe that's exactly what I want to do. And I'm attacking this pawn right here. And my opponent, he plays rook a7. And this was the first real hint for me that he's thinking now, his thinking has changed. Before, if we were to back up, all the way to here, right, where he has these ideas, where black has, an advantage. And then even here, where he plays a3, he sees a tactic. He's going for it, right? He's thinking, again, he wouldn't do this if he didn't think he had the advantage. And then it slips, right? And now he makes this unforced retreat. Okay, I bring my rook in. He comes down to check. All right, I trade rooks. Absolutely no problem. Then he plays knight e8. And why does he play knight e8? Because he's worried about me coming back to c7. If we just look at this position, if we back up. If I can play rook to c7, I'm hitting f7, and there's no way to defend it. It's simply lost. He can't bring his rook here to the b file to stop me because of my knight. And so the only move that he could think to stop rook c7 is to move his knight. So that's what he's thinking about right now. He has to defend the f-pawn from the rook coming to the 7th rank. So now, I keep trying to push my rook to the 7th rank. I play rook a2, where the obvious threat is I want to come in now instead to a7, where again I'll be attacking f7. My opponent, he moves his rook over. And again, why is he doing this? So that way he could meet rook a7 with rook c7, where again he'd be trading rooks. Now here's where I play, in my opinion, well, I thought it was clever, perhaps the most clever move, rook b2. So it's asking my opponent, what is he going to do? Because it's his move. If he moves the rook, well then I'm going to come into b7. That's going to be great. If he moves the knight, well then, again, I'm going to come down to the b file. If he moves his king away, the f-pawn drops. And so the move that made the most sense for him was rook c7. So again, stopping me from coming to the b file, to the 7th rank. And then I was able to play knight c6. And just hold on, let's back up like 4 moves here. So after the exchange of rooks here, just look at this position, and then look at this position. So we got this position, this position, this position, this position, this position. So here, his rook is doing something, right? It's nice and open. My knight is on the back rank. And then we look here. Now his rook is behind my knight. My knight is really imprisoning that rook. My rook is wide open. It could potentially come to the 7th rank maybe, or it can come to the 8th rank. And this rook it can't go anywhere. This knight really can't go anywhere. Where is it gonna go? Like g7 and then, I don't know. Black is starting to restrict himself. And then he played h5. Let's see if I put it on the board. Which is an absolutely normal move. But then after rook b8, he resigned. Because, of course, the knight's attacked. You can't defend it with the rook because you would lose it to the knight. So that doesn't work. Whoops. He can't defend with the king, again, because the knight controls it. The only move would be to move the knight. And then after this, again, there's no defense to this pawn. What do? He can't do anything. And then once this pawn falls, let's say he makes a move, let me know. Check, right? Then this pawn falls. And the whole game is just completely fallen apart for black. And he resigns. And what's absolutely hilarious about this entire thing, in my view, is, again, he's looking at this f7. His entire focus was how to stop the rook from coming to the 7th rank. And yet there's a really easy move he could have done. This entire time. He could have played king e7, attacking my knight. All right, I mean, if I try to defend it, okay, you can push it away. And then, okay, my pieces are on the back rank, but, again, he's got checks for days as well. That's fine. I'm not really doing anything, and my rook is tied to the knight. If the knight moves, you can move the king right back. Everything is fine. I mean, okay, it'll be a draw, but it's going to be a draw anyway. This should be an equal position. And what happened is my opponent, he was so focused on stopping the rook coming to the 7th rank that he didn't look at anything else. And that led him to getting tied up into knots. We can see this, right? His rook becomes passive, and then his knight can't move. And if his knight does move, he loses the pawn. And this is all self-inflicted wounds from him because he was looking at the wrong thing. Similar to my mistake earlier. Over here, where I could have taken the knight. That makes the most sense in the world. But instead, I was focusing on this pawn over here because this pawn's apparently more important than his king. And that's because I played king c2. When, of course, I could have played knight takes f6, f4, and have a really promising attack. Even objectively speaking, the computer says it's a +2 advantage already for white in this position. So, there it is. And so, this game, it was 40 moves, but really, you could break it down into just a couple of critical positions. And it's improving there. You know, not so much these other piddly moves, the natural developing moves, right? All those, like, that's fine, that's great. It's the critical positions. Being able to, A, recognize them, and to spend enough time to realize what you need to do. Just as a counterpoint, one more thing. I didn't even mention this. Is that just as I was worried about this pawn, the a4 pawn, is I spent quite a bit of time wondering, can I win this pawn? Because my queen's attacking it, my knight's attacking it, maybe I can win a pawn. Yay, one pawn, that might be great. For instance, take. Maybe that works. When I could have been thinking, hey, can I checkmate his king? Because that works much better. And it's one of those things you need to realize that I'm not good enough at this yet. I was so tunnel vision on the queen side, in the center, over here, on these two pawns, that I completely ignored. I completely dismissed this. Right? And that happens. It happens to us all. But it's something that we need to understand and watch going forward. So I'm going to cut that short now because it's already been half an hour. So again, SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. Hopefully that was comprehensive enough. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Questions, comments, let me know. I can go into more detail, later, but maybe not right now because it's been half an hour. Hopefully I'll get back to the videos, every week or every 5 days or whatever my old schedule was. We'll see. Life is always interesting, so it's really hard for me to commit to any one thing. But anyway, that's that. Again, like, subscribe, that'd be great. Comments, questions, I love feedback, let me know. Visit my blog, SmithyQ.com. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.